Um, so hi everyone, my name is Amanda DeVries. I'm here today to talk with you about all the things that go into designing a brand. Specifically, we're going to talk about, the idea of a restaurant or maybe some sort of related food or beverage business. And so we're going to get right into it. It is 2 hours long. So the idea being that I'm going to talk, hopefully for not all of it. I'd like to stop at some point and get some participation from you, some of your thoughts as you work through ideas on your own about what branding a restaurant could look like. So I'm sort of targeting the audience specifically for a group of people. Either you are a aspiring restaurateur or a chef who's thinking of opening a place. Maybe you've already working into your plans of running a place and you have some ideas about what the branding could look like. And you're just hoping to maybe see if, check in here and see if your thoughts of what you have so far is working well for you. Or maybe you have done this in the past and you've worked with a branding agency and you're just wondering where your money's going. What kind of research, what kind of work is being done behind the scenes to create a visual identity, to create a tone of voice and everything that would go alongside your business. So the way we're going to do it, we're going to talk a little bit about the background that goes into planning a brand. So we're going to look at things like the story behind your brand, the market that you're working within, the competition. We're going to touch on a few different types of exercises that a branding agency might go through to develop your identity. And we're going to go through an exploration of colors and fonts and specifically how it relates to food businesses. And then we're going to take those ideas and, sort of fictitiously create some assets. Think about what else needs to be done besides just having a pretty logo that might sit well in your profile pic on Instagram. What is our signage going to look like? What does menu design look like? All the things that need to be considered when you're going into this. And so, yeah, that's hopefully about maybe 30, 40 minutes I'm going to talk. And then we're going to move into the workshop portion where we're going to break down those ideas again, but this time maybe working, either together over through the chat, or maybe you can just work independently and put together a fictitious brand for yourself. So for that part, it would be ideal if you did have access to the web, just being able to utilize some tools on the web, which I'll talk about later. And yes, participate, whether it's asking questions or just kind of throwing out some ideas, pitching it to the group, seeing what we all think. It's a nice kind of intimate group today, so it'd be nice if everybody, felt comfortable enough to share their ideas and we can walk through them. And then ideally at the end, we've kind of all gone through this fictitious brand sort of exploration, and then maybe we can share our projects with each other and kind of go through them and and talk about them. And just a quick reminder, if you could mute yourself if you're not participating immediately. Thanks so much. Okay. Oops. So I'll just a little bit about myself. My name is Amanda DeVries. My parents came to Canada from India in 1973. I only say that because in the Indian culture, there is a huge focus on food. We wake up in the morning and while we're eating breakfast, we're talking about what we're going to eat for dinner that night. All of our celebrations are around really large food gatherings. So, food has always been a part of my life right from the beginning. About 12 years ago, we moved to Southwestern Ontario. My husband started an organic vegetable farm about 7 years ago. So once again, further ties to the food community here. I had a really great opportunity to meet people, like-minded people who really share our passion for great tasting food. And here, actually, I'm going to give a shout out to my friend, Chef Tim Drew, who I know is listening in. He said his kitchen would be loud, but I thought I'd just mention, say a quick hello to him. And as well, so I've been a graphic designer for over 15 years now. And when I started, I was sort of doing all kinds of general work, whatever literally came through the door. So insurance brokers, law firms, anybody that kind of needed branding or design of any kind. But with this sort of background and inherent interest in food, I started working with some food and beverage producers in the area and realized that this was a space that I really wanted to occupy. So I shifted my focus over to specialize in food and beverage branding, working with both restaurateurs as well as people who are launching food products a few years ago, and created a new agency called Eye Candy Design. And I've been doing that ever since and absolutely loving it. I'm also a board member on the RGD Association. That's the Registered Graphic Designers of Canada. So, you know, again, a great association to align myself with and learn from and network and a great group of people. So that's a bit about myself. So we'll get right into the branding. And the first piece of this, and this is becoming more and more important, especially with social media, and that's the idea of the story behind the brand. You know, why did this company come about? And it can be simple and it can be complicated. It can come from your culture. It can come from, you know, identifying a gap in the market. Maybe there is a food, either a dietary type of food or a cultural food that is missing from the marketplace. It could be a number of reasons, but it's important to think about that. It's not just, I love making this thing. It's, you know, people really want to know, why did you go through the effort of setting up a company, setting up a restaurant, going through all the hassle and heartache associated with it? Usually you're driven by something much larger. So I just gave these two examples just because, you know, if you know the companies, you kind of know what they're all about. Firehouse Subs, founded by firemen. I mean, their tagline says it all. You know, they started as firemen. They were interested in food and decided to start a new company. So right away, that's a very quick and simple story, but there is something beside it that makes it unique from other sub companies. Same thing with Momofuku. We all know sort of, you know, the idea that David Chang introduced Asian cuisine in a different way, kind of reinvented it for the audience that he was seeking. And we can kind of get behind that, you know, the mission that he had. So these are kind of simple examples. And I like to say, you know, this is an important part because as humans, when we were confronted with a lot of choices, we tend to get confused. We try to categorize things quickly, and if we can't categorize it, we dismiss it. So even though it seems counterintuitive, you actually do want to categorize yourself. You want to put your restaurant in the minds of someone kind of firmly in their brain in a certain slot, because if they can identify you in that slot, then when that, you know, that appetite comes about, or they're, you know, excited to eat that thing, you're going to come to mind right away because they've already filed you in there. And if you don't fit in a category, then you're not memorable, and people tend to forget about you, and it's not the, you know, what they think about when they're moving to the next stage. So it's important to sort of think of what that story could be for what you're trying to do, and really hone on it and really lean into it. And again, social media is a great way to sort of explain that over and over again, remind people why you're here, why you're doing what you're doing, why you're still here day in and day out, just to kind of keep that presence of mind. And I just put in a little note here, about us pages or the next page clicked after your homepage. So for, you know, it demonstrates that people are more interested in the story behind your brand than they are in the products themselves or what you have to offer or your services. So just keeping that in mind, that has become more and more important. The next thing to consider is the market. So these are the people who are going to patronize your business. And it's really important to get into their minds, because as consumers, we're always kind of just thinking about ourselves. What's in it for me? So you have to think about, what experience are you trying to create for them? If they're going for a night out, what is it that they're looking for? Is it an escape from their, you know, regular day to day? Are they looking to be entertained? Are they looking for just something simply quiet and out of the way? Another way to think of it is look at other brands that they buy. And this doesn't have to be related to food at all. You can think about, what kind of shoes do they buy? You know, you're trying to put a personality behind your ideal customer. So what kind of car do they buy? What kind of shoes do they buy? Where would they travel? Where do they buy their groceries? Is it farmers markets or is it chain grocery stores? So just trying to build, you know, making up this sort of avatar is what we call it, of the ideal customer. Because once you can put them in your mind of who you think you would love to have coming through your door every day, you can start to design the experience for them around that. And that will come into everything, including the branding, but also just the environment in general. Another important thing to think about is, what is their current frustrations with their dining options? Is there a problem that you can solve here? Is there something that, you know, whether it's talking to friends or talking to other people in the industry, or, you know, just talking to your current clientele, what is it that's missing from the experience currently? And perhaps you can fill that void with your venture. Ultimately, again, people are always going to think, what's in it for me? So what benefit are they going to be able to derive by choosing you versus the place next door? So it's really important to keep these things in mind. We do tend to think a little inwardly, as a business owner, you kind of think, well, I'm really great at this. Everyone's going to love it once they taste it. Well, maybe that's true, but you've still got to shift your mind more into the perspective of the person who is considering buying your thing. And really, what is it that's going to draw them in? What do they care about most? Not necessarily what we care about most, which can be kind of hard to think about. Another place to look outwardly is the competition. So this is, it's worth taking a look around, checking out the landscape around you. What options are already there that are already solving the problems that potentially you're hoping to address? And are you doing it well, or are they doing it poorly? And I don't know if this video is going to play, but it's really just, I just pulled up the BlogTO website and started scrolling all the restaurants that are listed. I only did this just because it's just a reminder of how much competition is out there. Again, we tend to look as business owners somewhat inwardly, thinking we're doing the next greatest X. In reality, there's so many people doing probably what we're doing. So part of the exercise when you're developing a brand is to do what's called the SWOT analysis. Stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And so what you would do is you would identify those 4 categories for yourself, as well as your competition. And sometimes just outlining those 4 categories and being able to fill in maybe a couple of bullet points of each, again, for yourself and for your potential competition, helps you to sort of see where the gaps are. Maybe no one has addressed, a specific dietary need or a specific environment. And maybe there's something there that is missing that your new venture can fill that gap. Alongside that, this is another marketing term you may have heard called your USP, your unique selling proposition. Again, how are you going to stand out? It has to be identifiable. It has to be memorable. You can't be just the next, fried chicken place or the next pizza place. There's got to be something else to it, because coming into that category, there's already lots of people doing it really well. They've already got all the clientele that you're hoping to get. So you've really got to think about the ways that you can stand out. I've also listed a few other things, of course, things that are becoming more and more popular, plant-based eating. People are looking for sustainability in their eating options. You can also identify other specific needs like being gluten-free or kosher, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, again, it may not be how you've sort of originally developed your food offerings, but it might be something to consider if it's going to help you, create that necessary USP. Okay, and then we're going to move into, so it may seem like I'm jumping all over the place. I'm just trying to give you some of the general tools that, most creatives will use when they're putting together some branding. So another idea is this brand personality. So if your brand was a person, what would they be? And so, they would have all these different qualities about them that you can see. I did just lift this off the internet, but basically it does a good job of sort of explaining, the types of characters that your brand could adopt, or characteristic traits, I should say, that your brand could adopt if it was a person. And so this is important too, because when we move into choosing, what colors and fonts you might consider for your brand, this will definitely come into play. And the way I like to do this is with a quick exercise. So we're going to use the chat function now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to display a brand that you may or may not be aware of. And if you don't, that's okay, because what I want you to do is, based on the look of that brand, if you could identify the personality behind the brand. And if you can use some of these, these words or any of the words that come up to you, just go ahead and write them in the chat and I'll read them off. And, as people kind of participate. So let's start with the Kashi brand. So looking at the Kashi brand, what do you, what kind of personality traits do you see here that maybe is in that, like I said, in that chart, or maybe ones that you've come up yourself? But again, just looking at colors and fonts and the way the brand is portrayed. So take a few minutes and then, start writing in the chat any of your ideas. You can see, they haven't done very much. It's a very simple logo, but right away you can identify they're using natural colors. So it must be having something to do with nature. There is the shape of a grain, a wheat stalk there, right? So must have something to do with food and grains. So it's very simple, but it's really giving you a very strong sense of what they're all about. Healthy and calm, yes, definitely. So they've actually changed their fonts slightly since this picture, but it still does, very similar job, just a little bit more contemporary. Okay, that's great. Let's do another one, probably one that you have seen before. Again, very different this time, but what are the sort of senses that you see in terms of the personality of this brand, just based on the use of their fonts and colors? Yeah, they chose to put the Jaguar in a moving position versus just sort of, sleeping on the ground or sitting, right? So that definitely gives you that sense of motion, movement, being dynamic, which is really important. And I'm sure that was carefully considered when they developed it. Yeah, and they're using, a metallic look to it, shiny, sleek. That usually means upscale, right? In our minds, we kind of go there. It's definitely the opposite of being natural and down to earth. They've chosen what's called a sans-serif font, so very clean, modern lines. So they're at the forefront of things. So, breaking it down, there's lots of different aspects to this logo that tell you, again, what it's all about before you even know that has anything to do with cars. Super slick branding, yes, and wild. That's great. And we'll do one more, just because I think these are fun. Again, based on colors, based on fonts, if you didn't know what Pampers was all about, what would this brand be telling you without saying too much? Cute, accessible, soft, cozy, excellent, for sure. To me, this brand, no matter how you feel maybe about Pampers or disposable diapers, it feels like a hug, right? Again, it's not saying anything about diapers, but as a parent, you want the best for your kid. And Pampers is saying that's what we are. We're like a hug. We're cozy. We want the best for your kid the same way that you do. Weirdly accurate color on the purpose of the product. I'm not sure specifically what this font might be. I would think with a company this big, it might be a proprietary font. They may have hired an agency to develop that for them, I suspect. Usually when you get that big, you can afford that and you don't have to license a font. So that's potentially what it's all about. Yeah, okay, that's great. So that's one way to look at it. So think about the brand personality of your restaurant or your business. What is it that you want to convey as a person versus a thing? Another strong way to look at brands, and you may have seen this before too, are what's called brand archetypes. And this can be a really useful tool too. And I won't go into each one separately. I will pull up this slide later when we're working on this piece of it again. But, we kind of have these sort of lofty personalities that go with a brand and what they want to be. And so you can sort of align yourself into one of these categories. And sometimes when you do, if you are able to say, yes, I am definitely, my brand is definitely going to be the caregiver type of archetype, that will help drive a lot of your decisions again when it comes to branding and marketing of what you're going to say, what your messages are going to be, what your colors are going to be, and that sort of thing. So, just for an example, looking at the creator, so someone who's imaginative and inventive, and allowing you to build things. So examples would be Lego or Crayola or Adobe. A rebel is another great archetype. You see that in Virgin, Harley Davidson, Diesel jeans, that sort of thing. So a rebel kind of looking to be against the norm. So you can definitely see these archetypes in the larger brands. The Jester is another good one. Old Spice, definitely. Ben & Jerry's, M&M's. It's all playful. Everything you see about them is like, let's not take life too seriously. Let's be a little bit irreverent, right? So these are things that you can think about, again, when you're trying to develop your brand. As this is kind of driving to our human nature. As humans, we already identify with these archetypes and we can recognize them and categorize them. So once again, if you can say you are one of these archetypes, you're just going to be that much more memorable to your potential audience. Okay, let's see how we're doing here for time. Just going to quickly look. Okay. So we're going to dive into colors and fonts. Obviously, there's lots here to think about. I'm just kind of giving a couple of quick tips. One thing with branding, it can be this is often the challenge, is that we want to be different. We obviously need to stand out against the competition, like I was saying earlier, but you can't be too crazy. You can't be too off the mark, because if you're causing that kind of brand confusion in people's minds, they're not likely going to buy from you. So it's got this weird dichotomy where you need to be familiar and yet different at the same time. So this is where things can be, it can get a little difficult. Depending on the industry, depending on your competition, it can be a pretty easy thing. But this is where maybe a professional can sort of help you figure out how to stand out, but still be, in the right category in people's minds. We also need to consider the idea of how it needs to be reproducible in digital and print. That's obviously becoming more and more important. And also thinking about the mood and personality that we want to display. When it comes to fonts, my favorite thing in the world, that's why I'm a designer. But I always have to keep going back to this idea that we need to be legible before anything else. And you'll see in a lot of food companies, you know, sometimes they try to push the limits of making it so stylistic. But again, there's always this danger that if people can't pronounce it or read it or understand it, you've lost them. So we'll dive into that just a little bit. And again, this is sort of just kind of a color guideline, things to think about when you're exploring the idea of colors. Generally speaking with food, there's obviously some categories you can see right away. Bright colors are often used in candies or treats. Browns are used in sort of grains, that sort of thing. I do recommend you kind of stay away from blues and purples. They're not, I mean, it's just usually because when we're talking about food, we usually align those ideas with things that we find in nature naturally. So when it's not a natural color, we don't associate it with food, which can often lead to a loss of appetite. So obviously that's not what we're going for when it comes to a food brand. So again, just some ideas, like things to think about when you're thinking about colors. And again, this slide will come up later when we talk about it. But I did want to demonstrate some kind of what I think are do's and don'ts in the industry. And so this is one, this has always been the bane of my existence. And this is Harvey's. Again, may not be the most current logo, but they are still using this purple color, which to me for a hamburger company is it's just wrong. There's nothing purple about a burger. So, and it's not identifiable. It's not appetizing. It's somewhat off-putting. So I just can't understand why a company that big has stuck with this color all this time. Burger King and McDonald's, even though you could argue, oh yeah, their colors are super similar, but they're very much in line with what we think of as consumers when we go to eat a burger, right? So in that sense, they're playing the right field and they're finding other ways to identify themselves and differentiate themselves, but they're sticking to the right colors. There's two other examples I have here. And this is one where Russ and Daughters in New York, they actually are using blue effectively because a lot of their products are based on fish. So, fish, we do identify with blue oceans and that. So they've used it very simply. They've used it in an understated way. And it still very much aligns with a food product. Italio, a modern Italian kitchen, obviously using red, that's kind of a go-to for Italian food, but again, it sits right with us. If I'm going to eat a meal, an Italian pasta, tomato-based meal, I expect that the logo or the branding would have, connotations of those colors because that's what they're offering. So again, sitting right in my mind. And they're also, just so happens kind of using a bit of a vintage font that you might see on a sign, in Italy somewhere. So they're definitely kind of giving you that sort of sense of nostalgia. Two other examples of color, contrasting examples. In the case of El Felix, it's a happy Mexican restaurant, lots of celebrations going on, so lots of bright colors. You are in a happy mood when you walk in. You feel like you're celebrating even if it's the middle of the week. So great job of sort of just kind of playing with the colors and experimenting with them. Tat Bakery, really great example of very clean. They just kept it black and white. They don't want to say much else other than, they're an upscale cafe. So the use of black and white can be very effective. It allows you to be able to play with your menu a little bit more. It's very, it's commonly used, but it can be very, very elegant. Okay, and then moving into fonts a little bit. So again, I wanted to give you an example of what I wouldn't recommend. I think there's 3 or more fonts all in this logo. And it's a little bit confusing, right? We don't know where to look first. There's a lot of colors, there's a lot of images going on. Saying pasta fresca, I would think puts to mind they offer pastas. So maybe the need for a graphic isn't necessarily there. We've all kind of already said it with our words. We're saying pasta and pizza, so maybe we don't need the pictures anymore. You're always trying to think about, you put everything you've done, you kind of do your brain dump on a page, and then you start subtracting, like, what is redundant here? What can I save space on? How do I eliminate something to make it cleaner, easier to read? So again, in the case of fonts, they kind of went a little bit crazy, and I wouldn't recommend it. But two other examples where they're using very unique fonts, certainly, but they've done it in a very understated way. So on the left-hand side, one of my favorite American designers, Louise Feely, she has done a lot of branding and packaging, especially for Italian and a lot of European sort of based restaurants and that. So she's very carefully, selected a very vintage kind of looking font, very upscale and elegant for this restaurant. Right away, you can see, it's an Italian name. It has a bit of a nostalgic feel to it. It's very simple and very understated, but does the job super effectively. And then one of my favorite coffee shops in Toronto, Propeller Coffee, they're using sort of a font that brings to mind, well, obviously transportation, vehicles, whether it's airplanes or even motorcycles, that sort of thing. Very simple colors, very vintage looking fonts. And so again, it's just kind of already putting you in a place and time without saying very much at all. And then I just brought up two other quick examples, just because I can talk about fonts all day long, so I apologize. But yeah, on the left-hand side is some work by a creative agency out of Montreal. They rebranded this product line of ciders from a cidery out in Quebec. And to me, right away, the very judicious choice of fonts and colors right away brings you back to I'm picturing like a table in a dining in a restaurant in Quebec City, just beautiful, very nostalgic, very simple, but very evocative of the mood that they're trying to create. So they did a great job there. And then also with Jenny's ice cream, you can see, choosing a fun, playful font. Ice cream is not ever meant to be serious. So, keeping things really light and simple and playful, but also very readable. So yeah, more great examples there.
Amanda, just before we get too far ahead, Vula is asking what her name, again, what was her name? So I'm not sure which one she's referring to.
Oh, maybe Louise Feely, is that what it's the designer there? Yeah, I'll put it in the chat. Okay, sorry about that. Thanks, Vula. We're going to go into one more technique for sort of developing what your brand could look like. And this is called a mood board. I don't know if you guys have heard about this before. A mood board is basically just kind of drawing all the elements that may go into the creation of a brand. And so I often do start this way as well. When I work with a client and we kind of identify what the personality needs to be, who we're talking to, what the messages are. And then we start thinking about, okay, if that's what our positioning is, what does that mean in terms of colors, fonts, environment, etc. So what we do is we put a mood board together. And this means sort of just whether it's scouring the internet, or maybe it's even visiting an art gallery, or maybe it's just going into nature and just getting inspiration from there and sort of pulling pictures and images and ideas together that sort of just evokes the sense that we're trying to create. So here I'm going to give you two examples of mood boards that I created for clients. So this company is an olive oil company out of California, and we were looking to rebrand and as well as create a new labeling system for their olive oils. So we were very much centered on the idea that obviously olive oil is used in the kitchen, creating food from scratch. So we definitely wanted to focus on families, multi-generational families, cooking together, creating meaningful memories together. But we wanted to keep things really clean and simple. Her olive oil is super fresh and fragrant. And so we really wanted that we wanted to hit those really bright notes that are present in good quality olive oil. And then we were also looking at other brands, like I said, Nordstrom, not necessarily a food brand, but we liked the minimal aspect of its logo. So we were trying to think about, how do we hit those notes of sophistication, cleanliness, minimalism. So this is what a mood board looks like, just pulling in some images, pulling in some logos, looking at what the color palette could look like. And you can see right away, there's sort of some themes that we can sort of tease out from here, right? And then we can develop the brand from there. In contrast, here's another example of an apple farm. So I was working with them on their rebranding. It's very local. Obviously, an apple farm, you can only sell directly to the people who are willing to drive to, within your region. So our focus was really staying close to the area. It's very family friendly. People come for their visits and they pick their own apples. So we wanted to make sure that there was a sense of a bit of celebration and happiness. But I was also really drawn to vintage fruit labels that you would typically see on crates of fruit. So I was obviously, kind of pulling from there as well and looking at what kind of inspiration we could get from these sort of vintage pieces. So again, developed a color palette from that, developed sort of the kind of retro fonts that we were going to use and that sort of thing, just looking based on this mood board. So obviously all of these things will come together and ideally create some kind of logo, some kind of visual identity that you're going to then use. And we'll talk in more practical terms about what that should look like later. But one thing to also think about when you have this logo is it's got to work for you in many different ways, especially in the case of a restaurant. You're going to shrink it down to a tiny little circle on Instagram, and you're also going to blow it up in front of your brick and mortar business on your signage. So it's got to work in a lot of different ways, and everything in between. You're going to have business cards. You might have a menu. There's all kinds of ways that this graphic asset is going to get reused. So, all that collateral comes together and is worth considering. So again, these might affect what you're going to do when you're putting your brand together. So if you kind of see that you're, if you're going for a very earthy, natural look, well, obviously your signage should have those sort of natural textures to it somehow. When you're looking at your website or you're considering your social media, you can think again, what mood am I trying to create? And if I'm going to have like lifestyle photos of people enjoying this food, what is that going to look like? Is it bright and airy? Is it moody? Is it dark? Is it romantic? All these kinds of things. What kind of photos am I going to be using? How are you going to handle the holidays and seasonality? Because definitely in social media, we're expecting new content all the time and to be relevant and up to date. So, these are things to think about. It pays to sort of think about them ahead of time a little bit, just because it might affect something. You don't want to be constricted by what you've created and realize that it's not going to work for all these different scenarios that are eventually going to come up. Same thing with the menu design, of course. You can take advantage of all these pieces to further strengthen your brand. Maybe, the type of menu that you develop and how it looks, even if it's digital, again, where can you once again tell the story of your brand, give the feel of the brand? There's lots of opportunities, lots of touch points that you can create that strengthens that whole tone of voice that you're going for. And then finally, consider creating a brand book for your business. So this sounds super official. All it really means is just kind of put together, have a repository of, everything in case you need to hand this off to someone. You're going to have staff that's probably going to handle your social media for you. You might have a photographer who's doing your photos for you. So make sure that everybody's on the same page, literally. So, having a place where you say, okay, these are the fonts that we're using. These are the colors, give examples of the types of pictures that you're hoping to use. And just kind of, it's kind of a do's and don'ts, like really like, let's stay away from this conversation. We're not going to touch that topic, or we're not going to touch those colors and fonts. And just kind of make it so that there is some sort of central place that everybody can access going forward. If anything, new needs to be developed or the menu needs to be redesigned, whatever it might be, that you're always coming back to this sort of brand book. And it doesn't have to be super official. It doesn't have to be super big. It's just something that's kind of set aside. And then again, so when you're not there and not physically able to explain things, it hopefully does the talking for you. Okay, speaking of talking, I'd like to take just a small break, just to give everybody a chance to kind of move around, maybe take a drink of water, maybe use the bathroom. 2 hours is a long time. And what I was thinking is that for the next part, when we're working on the workshop, I would love it if we all kind of created our own mood boards for a fictitious brand. So what that might mean, it can be something as simple as just saving pictures from Google and throwing it into a folder. That's fine. That's a totally legit way to do it. If you want to play around a little bit more, and if you have Canva or Pinterest, you can go ahead and use them. I know Canva has a template for mood board. Just type in mood board as creating a design. They'll give you ones to get started. Pinterest, if you're familiar with it, is just a way of pinning things on the web and putting them all in one place. And they kind of display it in a nice way, sort of grid-like, so we can take advantage of that. So if you don't have either of those and you want to experiment and you feel comfortable, please go ahead and sign up. And then we're going to, like I said, we're going to go through all the things that I talked about already, step by step, and we're going to sort of try and draw from ideas that we see, that exist already, and in the hopes of creating something new. Play a little bit now, now that everyone's back. If you do have any other questions based on the presentation before, please feel free to just send them in the chat, and Renee or Arlene can point them out to me. But in the meantime, we're going to kind of dissect everything that I've already talked about and try to use it on ourselves. I was trying to figure out how we can all do this in a group. We're sort of a large group. So I think what we're going to do is kind of work on it individually, ideally. And then as you kind of put things together, we'll work on it in the next sort of like half an hour or so. And then we'll leave half an hour for us to share our projects with each other, for people who are willing to kind of put themselves out there a little bit. And just, and kind of just talk about ideas and things that they've come up with. So I think that'd be super fun. So hopefully there's a few brave souls out there. Okay, so I thought of two potential restaurant scenarios. So I was kind of thinking it'd be nice if we kind of, if the group chose one versus the other. Either one doesn't really matter, just because at the end, then when we do share, we can kind of compare and contrast, different ideas that came out from the same idea. But then I also thought I don't want this to feel like school. So if you really feel like there's a scenario that you out there, or your own personal brand that you're already developing, if you want to work on through that, that's totally legit as well. So I'm not going to hold you to anything, but these were two sort of potential ideas that I was thinking of that might be fun to kind of experiment with. So just kind of keeping those in mind. Let's start. Again, if this is already a real idea in your mind, feel free to borrow from it. Otherwise, when you go to develop your story around your brand, again, a very important part of the process, just think about what that story is. And that story can include things like, how did you start? Why did you start it? Who are you specifically? What's your background? What qualifications do you have? What's your experience? Where have you been? It's all about the uniqueness that we're bringing to potentially a crowded marketplace. Why are you doing it? What's the point in what you're doing? What's important to you? What are you hoping to accomplish with what you're doing? And how are you going to accomplish it? Actually, this just brings to mind, I'm sort of been mentoring someone who lives in a smaller city, and she is hoping to bring cultural foods to her city. At this point, it's still a lot of Italian places and steakhouses, and she's looking to bring some various Asian cultures, cultural food experiences to this area. And so she's making it a bit of a mission. This is her. She's not only just selling food, but she's taking that opportunity to sort of bring this message to people who don't otherwise have access to it. So to me, her story is very strong, and this will be a really great opportunity when she's developing her branding to be able to talk about that and become almost a bit of a messiah of sorts, and bringing this message to people. So think about what your story is. And again, if you want to just jot it down on a piece of paper, on your phone or whatever, and be able to share it with the group later, that would be great. Moving into the market as well, really thinking about who's your target customer. We all want to say it's everybody. We want, from grandmas to toddlers to walk into our place or buy our products. But in reality, we have to speak very strongly to one person or one group of people. Otherwise, you're not talking to anyone. You have to have some haters in order to have people really love you and align with you. So you've really got to think about who is that person? What do they stand on? What don't they like? How do you speak to them? And therefore you'll, if you can kind of develop that avatar in your mind, you'll also be able to know where else they're hanging out. And maybe that's your way that you advertise. If you know what magazines that they purchase, these are things that you can always think about that will help you put them in their space and then be able to meet them where they already are. Another thing to think about what they do on their leisure time. So just jot down some notes, what's the demographic that you're shooting for, and kind of try to answer these questions here. And then finally, if you can, if you're talking about a specific city, if you have a city in mind, go ahead and list the real places that you already know about that could potentially be competition. And something to think about, this is maybe not enough time in this session to do this, but things to think about when you're listing your competition is, how are you going to meet them on price or product? What are your promotions going to look like? What is different about your venue versus theirs? So these are different things that you would also consider when you're looking at your competition. Okay, just briefly, I'm going to just talk about my story. You can totally ignore it if you're busy working on yours. But this kind of going through this exercise made me think of my own personal culture. So my parents are from Goa, which is a very special place in India, in the sense that it is quite heavily Catholic. So the Portuguese, when they colonized parts of India, Goa was one of their central areas. So it's unique in the sense that it's a very Catholic area, and the food, as a result, developed through this intersection of the Portuguese cooking methods as well as Indian spices. So the food can be pretty different. And growing up, if I visited an Indian restaurant, I didn't recognize anything on the menu because it had nothing to do with the food that I was used to consuming at home. This has obviously changed a lot. There's a lot more Goan food out there and available, but it's still a relatively kind of a new concept to a lot of people. So I was kind of thinking along the lines of, oh, maybe this is something that I could sort of bring about potentially in a city like London, which is where I live, that maybe there isn't as many, there's no Goan food options right now. So because it's a little different, looking at the target customer, it has to be someone who's a bit of an adventure eater, a bit of a foodie. They have to like pork, but Goan food is very pork centric. So I'm probably targeting, meat eaters as a group. And then I started thinking about, maybe these kinds of people who are a bit more adventuresome and kind of like their mobility in that it could be, for instance, music festivals, or, once we get back to that sort of way of living, maybe it could be a food truck that visits different events and festivals. And then that way it could be sort of this cultural experience for people who are already out there, putting themselves out there, looking for sort of new and novel experiences. So this might align really well with those types of people. So a younger group, maybe a bit more mobile, maybe not so much families that don't have that kind of mobility or ability to spend money on that sort of thing. So just kind of keeping that in mind as a potential audience. I didn't have time to look at the competition here, but obviously I would be looking at both who is already offering Goan food and how they're doing it, as well as food trucks, and especially food trucks that are maybe offering cultural food experiences. So because people might not necessarily know the difference between a Goan food and maybe Laotian food or something there, but we'd still be kind of looking for the same types of people. So we might need to think about, what are people already doing, and what can I do differently that will help me to stand out, not just in my food, but maybe on price and that sort of thing. So hopefully that gives you a sense of where to start thinking when it comes to those pieces of the puzzle. The next thing is the personality. So just kind of like we did before, if your brand was a person, what would they be like? So, 3 to 5 words is usually good. We don't want to spread ourselves too thin. Again, every time we try to be all things to all people, we end up speaking to nobody. So it's really, I go through this exercise all the time with companies because everyone resists this idea of pigeonholing themselves. And it's absolutely opposite. If you try to speak too broadly, people stop listening. But if you say 1 or 2 words that kind of rings the bell in their mind, they're way more likely to listen to it. And so those people will become your absolute #1 fans, even if it is sort of pushing away people that were kind of only half into it anyways. So really important to kind of be as narrow as you can. And simply when you think about the brands that you yourself like personally, if you probably like them because you can describe them in 1 or 2 words, whether it's their personality or what they do or what their mission is. And that's why it really resonates with you, because you consider yourself someone with those same values. So really, the same thing is true for any kind of building, any kind of brand that you're trying to build. So, yeah. And then again, you may want to think about the archetype. What kind of, sort of existential person could you be? What kind of mission do you have as your place on Earth? Again, it's, human nature. We identify with these archetypes. They're in the stories that we read and watch on TV and look for in movies. And so they also exist in the brands that we align ourselves with. So if you can put an archetype to your brand that you've got in your mind, yeah, please do. Okay, going back to colors and fonts. Again, we're trying to evoke a certain mood with our brand, right? Whether it's playful or serious or romantic or moody or educational. We're trying to set a mood. And we also want to make people hungry. So really think about that when you're putting together your colors and fonts. How are you going to stand out? And, there's nothing wrong with going back to art school and thinking about the color wheel. You'll see a lot of the more effective brands and things that are, again, more memorable, use opposites on the color wheel as their color palette. And, there's a reason for that. It works. It stands the test of time. So, you can really tease those out. And so there's no reason why you can't, as a business owner, do the same thing. And then always thinking about your brand personality. When it comes to the fonts, if there is sort of an ethnic component potentially to your brand, and by that I just mean, something maybe, again, that's different from the cultural norm that we kind of associate with North America, there may be a way to sort of introduce that. Of course, there's always this sort of careful line between appropriation and versus experiencing it. So we always have to be sensitive to that. But we do at the same time still want to show, if you're introducing something that's going to be a little unusual, you do need to sort of send out those signals that, what you're about to experience is maybe a little bit different from what you might expect. Legibility is super important again, shrinking it down to Instagram profile pictures. That's one thing I really noticed with branding over time. The trend has really come to sort of force designers into creating more even aspect ratios of logos because, we have to fit it into that circle. And so that it's kind of interesting that our technology has driven design trends. But then again, yeah, going back to your brand personality and what the fonts can do for you. Thinking about the colors again, so I'm just bringing up this chart again, just as a reminder of what going back to your story and what brand you're trying to build. Maybe there are colors that are more obvious than the others that, and this will sort of help you remember what it does bring to mind sort of naturally in people's minds. So maybe jot down, 2 to 3 colors, maybe potentially, that might be suitable. And then again, just sort of thinking about, obviously we're not going to get this far along in our discussions today, but, just keeping these things in mind. Again, if you're developing a brand, how is it going to work in all the different scenarios and situations, and how can it carry forward? Because just trying to anticipate what's going to be the next step after you go beyond the visual identity itself. So yeah, we won't spend too much time there, but what I was kind of hoping is, if people are ready potentially to share. Now, I know we didn't give you a lot of time, so maybe we can take a few more minutes to put together, a mood board or something. If you wanted to show us some examples of that, we can definitely do that. So let's take another 10 minutes here to sort of go through that. And again, if you wanted to ask any questions in the meantime, if you wanted to clarify anything that you're not too sure about, then please go ahead and send that in the chat. Let's go till maybe 10:20 or 10:30, and then we'll be able to share our projects and answer questions. I'm just going to show you guys as we're going, sort of some of where I kind of get my inspiration from when I'm using things like Pinterest. And I do try to not, have all my inspiration come digitally. Obviously, that's an easy thing to do. We have access to everything now, but it's very two-dimensional, very flat. And so what I'll do personally is try to expose myself to whether it's seeing art or even music, or even looking at things like vehicles, just trying to get inspiration of lines and textures and colors from other places. So the more I can expose myself to new experiences, the better. It just informs my designs, and and it can be in subtle ways. So I mean, obviously today all we can do is do it digitally. So I'll go ahead and share my Pinterest boards with you guys, but ideally you're kind of getting out there and you're experiencing things and you're exposing yourself to new things that kind of work away in your brain as you kind of go about your days. So just quickly do that for a minute. And I'll just show you guys some other ones. I hadn't really thought about which one I want to show you, but no, that one's not good. Let me see here. I have a lot. Oh, no, that's not the one I want to show. This might be, no, that was an interior. This was one we were looking for. We were developing a brand that was sort of had kind of a revolution sort of spirit to it. So we were looking at a lot of bright colors, strong sort of elements to it, large fonts, saturated colors, that sort of thing. So you can kind of see how there's a bit of a theme going along there. This is another one when we were looking at different types of cake mixes and what, what could be incorporated there. Again, looking at what people are already buying, but trying to figure out where our position could be amongst what exists out there already. These are one of my favorite places to look, is vintage labels on beverages and that. So some pretty strong colors and fonts here. Definitely when you're designing for packaged goods, you're always having to think it's sitting on a shelf. People are walking by with their shopping carts. They only have a few seconds to figure out who you are, what you're selling, what you're all about. So, using strong visuals to kind of get that point across quickly without really saying too much is very important. Yeah. I'll just keep. Oh yeah, looking at taking advantage of shop windows, right? We always have kind of all kinds of real estate available to us. So how can we be unique? How can it be memorable? How can we provide an experience that strengthens that brand a little bit? This was a cafe that, I was helping someone, giving some consulting advice on, and so we were just looking at all the various elements, everything from colors to textures, and what kind of interesting sort of, I call them peekaboo spaces that we can create, whether it's, printing lettering on the wall, or creating a collection of some kind of vintage items. Here, there's some mugs, all on a shelf, like just things that we can do that they don't have to be expensive, but they need to be dramatic. So yeah, just kind of always looking at how do we, create those sort of unique experiences for people. I didn't answer this question. The difference between a mood board and an inspiration board, they're really the same thing. They're just, different words for the same idea. Just basically that you're trying to draw, what things sort of appeal to you, what draws your attention. And again, not necessarily just you, but your customer. If you're putting yourself in the mind of the customer, what are the things that are going to really draw them in, give them the complete experience that you're hoping to provide. So, and it can come from anywhere, like I said, whether it's the physical, so you've been taking pictures of things that have really, excited you, or things that you find online. And, always with this mind that obviously we can't plagiarize, so we're not going to outright copyright people, dishonor people's copyrights. Obviously, we don't want to completely steal an idea, but also recognizing that creativity is never started from a blank slate. We're always getting kind of, there's things that are happening in our brains that are assimilating all our experiences and textures and feels that we've had in our, in our previous experiences. So just kind of recognizing that, as much as you can gather and have and I really, I do believe that your subconscious is working on things without you even really realizing it. So just letting all that kind of come together into a place. So, not outright plagiarizing, but definitely it's okay to look beyond you and see what else is being done and understand how things can maybe be incorporated. And again, it doesn't have to come straight from your industry or from a category that you're in. It can come from anywhere. Okay, is there anybody ready to share? If you are, you can either just use the reaction button to raise your hand, or you can just go ahead and chat or turn on your mic.
Just fictitious, because I don't have any brand. So I just imagined it could be an upscale insect deli that could attract maybe a different clientele for the protein that maybe we could be all striving for, and just to make insects a bit more, I don't know, interesting in a different way, maybe push them out. I don't know, I remember I once saw in Harvey Nichols, they had like this really cute insect lollipops, and that was ages ago. And somehow I don't see really insect food in a luxury setting. So it could be just like a hyper modern deli that would do different weird products, or maybe actually normally looking products, but really posh out of insects. And I don't know, like posh for me was about toned down colors, quite deep, a bit serious, maybe just to take that funny ewy bug thing out of the bugs, and just kind of give it a
and it cleaned it up, right?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm actually not sure, but
I think that's great. I think this is definitely one where there would be an education piece to it, right? People aren't familiar with it, even though other cultures have been doing it forever. Here in in a Western centric area, we don't necessarily have that relationship with it. So it would be creating something that was a bit more palatable to our audience. And so there is that education piece. So yeah, kind of maybe cleaning up a little bit, like you said, I think it's great. I think it's a really great idea. I love that.
Can I just say,
I like the typeface really, but I don't know. I think it could do with a handwritten one maybe, but I'm not sure. I don't know. It was just a really quick one, but
I'm super impressed. I mean, in such a short period of time, I'm blown away. Tilda,
yeah,
tell us where you're calling in from.
Sorry?
Tell us where you're zooming in from.
Oh, Bangkok. Yeah, it's late. Maybe the beer helped. Yeah.
Really impressive.
Yeah, that's great. I agree with you that yeah, I would have a tendency to try to make it a little abstract, a little playful, make it feel like, especially the word adventure means, you're implying it's going to be in a bit of an adventure. So yeah, making it friendly, which you've done, and making it, a bit more accessible, I think is great. And yeah, definitely the use of colors, you hit the nail on the head. Definitely using the more minimal, subdued kind of colors is a great way to sort of hint at the idea that it is more of an upscale kind of place. So that's so cool.
Thank you so much. Wow.
No problem. Great. I'm just gonna see if I can dig up one thing easily. If I can't, then yeah, we can leave it as if people want to ask more questions, or if that's it, then we can certainly sign off. But yeah, I was kind of just curious. Again, you don't have to fully flesh out anything if it's just an idea that you have already been considering and just kind of want the group.
Yeah, actually, I just want to ask a question about Canvas usage. So I'm always quite confused about what I heard, whether like these designs from there can be actually used commercially on packaging. I don't know, for example, say somebody creates his own brand in Canva, can they actually reuse these images on a commercially produced product or like a branding that's hanging somewhere?
That's right. Yeah. So you're right. I mean, that brings up actually two good questions. Or two good points. Definitely when it comes to the actual graphics and illustrations and that, you'll have to look at the specific license for each one. I don't know with Canva necessarily what you should be able to find what the license is. But they'll be explicit in whether you can take it and break it up into something else and repackage it and sell that as a new design, or whether you can. So there's different types of creative licenses, right? Or you can use it and you can put it on 10,000 printed products. They'll be very explicit about how it can be used. So in the case of Canva, I'm not sure. I tend to use more, premium sites, being, since it's my profession, I use like iStock Photo and Creative Market and that, and they all say, if you purchase this artwork, illustration, or font, these are the terms with which you can use it. So I would tend to say probably Canva, because everything's free. You probably can't necessarily commercialize it, at least easily. And so that's something definitely to be aware of, for sure. And so, it all comes down to kind of figuring out early on, what's allowed. I'm not going to say everybody pays attention to that. Certainly, I'm sure not everyone, I'm sure people are commercializing it, but it's obviously not recommended. You could get caught. It's just not ethical. I would never, do that myself, but yeah, so just being aware of that, reading the license through Canva or any other site that you're using. The other thing I wanted to point out with Canva, and so when you're working with professional designer, they're always creating what's called a vector file. So if you guys haven't heard about this before, basically a vector file is created in an application software such as Adobe. And a vector file is inherently scalable. So it can be shrunk down, it can be enlarged, and you can do whatever you want with it. And it's always going to maintain its resolution and be nice and crisp. With the free programs online, they tend to not allow you to create vector files. What they're doing is creating what's called, the old term is called a bitmap file, meaning there's a fixed resolution to it. So I do see this quite often where people will use Canva to create their logo. They'll make it you have to make it a fixed size. That's the only option. And then they go to try and blow it up and put it as a final decal in their window. And you'll know when it's failed because you'll start to see, a blurriness or pixelation to the image. So Canva can be really great. It's not that I'm down on it. I think it solves a lot of problems for people when it comes to creating social media content and, quick posters and things like that. It has enough resolution for a lot of day-to-day tasks, but you will get limited as you try to, extend it beyond that capability. So just warning people that, make sure that you can somehow get a vector file of your logo, whatever it's going to be, because that's ultimately what you're going to need just to kind of be able to go the long mile. So recently I was talking to someone about it, and they did say there is what's called an SVG option in Canva. So if you can create a file with the .svg extension, that is a vector file. So I guess they have changed things since I last looked at it. So just something to consider, to just keep that in mind. Another thing I like to explain to people who are sort of doing it on their own is the difference in color and the inherent limitations with color. So on our screens, we have 16 million different colors that we can recreate. But in print, it's very different, right? The technology on a screen is that the colors are coming from pixels and being shot out with light. With printed materials, it's inks on paper, and then we're relying on daytime light to reflect off of it. So that inherently limits the color range that we can produce in print. So again, you may create something digitally within a software program, and you think it's amazing and it's bright and it's saturated and it's super cool. And then you go to print it at a local printer and suddenly the colors are flat and dull and maybe don't have that same vivacity. So just keeping that in mind, that you are going to have those kind of limitations. So again, a professional designer or an agency will usually map your color choices to what they know are reproducible colors within the print system. So that can be something that's just really helpful. But if you're not going to go that way, just be aware that you may stumble across that. So it's good to test print things, make sure things are coming out before you really spend the money on your signage or your menus or whatever it might be. Make sure you invest in just kind of printing it on a good quality paper and printers, and just seeing whether the colors are coming through the way you kind of imagined that they did on the screen. So it's not always a problem. Our printing technologies have gotten better and better over time for sure. But it can be a limitation, especially with certain color ranges like greens and reds and that. So Yeah, but Canva definitely does a lot for you to kind of get you started. And I think it's a great way to sort of test your waters. But you may, ideally your company becomes more successful and you're making money and you're getting some revenue. And then there would be a time, in the near future where you would need to maybe invest in some professional services to help you with those things. Yeah, and I think it's things actually that we've already talked about, not plagiarizing, understanding the idea of a vector file, and yeah, not being able to necessarily reproduce all the colors that you see on a screen. And also just keeping in mind, again, these things that I just want you to think about when you are developing your own branding is go ahead and do the research. Don't get too stuck in your own mind with this idea that you have that is just, you think is absolutely perfect and going to save the world. Really be aware of what's already out there, what's coming, what are the trends, what are we going to see more of in the future. Always think about the customer, always think about what they want and what they need and what problems they have and how you can solve them. And especially in the hospitality business, being consistent with experience. That's a huge challenge, I know, for everyone. But that is ultimately your brand, right? It's what people remember and think about and talk about. So if whatever you can do to make the experience more consistent for everyone, whatever you have control over, definitely spend the time and invest the effort into that. And that's it. These are my contact details. If you do want to get a hold of me, if you do have questions that you'd rather ask privately, please go ahead and use that. I've had a lot of fun. Hopefully you have too. It's been, thank you so much, Matilda, for sharing your ideas. I think that was really great to see the thought process and everything. So yeah, if you want to bounce any ideas off of me, please feel free to do so, and enjoy the rest of Terroir.